The sharp click of the door closing behind him echoed across the vast, modern office. Madeline Carter didn't need to look up to know Nathan Blake was standing there, the smug smile already creeping up his face. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the same feeling she had when he first handed her divorce papers years ago. Cold, calculating, and, as always, completely unbothered by the damage he was about to cause. "Effective immediately," Nathan said, his tone dripping with the same arrogance he had used during their marriage. He slid a set of termination papers across the glass desk with practiced ease, like he had done this 1,000 times before. His suit, sharp and perfectly tailored, was a stark contrast to her usual hoodie and jeans. She didn't bother to look at him. She didn't need to. She had seen him like this before. Her fingers hovered over the papers, but she made no move to touch them just yet. The clock on the wall ticked, and she felt a strange calm wash over her. The kind of calm you feel when you know the storm is coming, but you've already made peace with it. 6 years ago, I wrote the first line of Signal Corps' code on a coffee-stained napkin in my basement, Madeline thought, her eyes fixed on the papers in front of her. And today, he's taking my chair. Madeline's mind raced, but her face remained an emotionless mask. She had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment, and now it was here. Nathan, her ex-husband, the COO of the company she founded, had managed to pull off the hostile takeover. The board, his loyal pawns, had voted unanimously to oust her, leaving her with nothing. Nathan's voice cut through her thoughts. "You've always been a builder, Maddie. I'm the one who knows how to lead." Madeline finally looked up, her eyes locking with his. She said nothing for a moment, taking in the man who had once been her partner, the man who had once believed in her vision. Now, all he cared about was power, and he had no qualms about taking it from her. "No," she said, her voice cold and calm, "you're just the one who knew how to manipulate." Nathan flinched at the words, but he quickly recovered, the smile never faltering. He leaned back in her chair, the one she had sat in for years, the one she had earned. His posture was casual, confident, as if he had already won. "Is that it?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, his voice tinged with disbelief. "No begging? No tears?" Madeline didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She didn't even feel the anger that should have surged through her veins. She had already accepted it. She had known this was coming. She was prepared for it. She signed the papers without hesitation, her fingers smooth as they glided across the page, each stroke final, a mark of her quiet defeat. Nathan stared at her, confused. His expression faltered for just a moment. He had expected her to fight, to scream, to beg him to reconsider. But she didn't. She simply stood up, grabbed her laptop and a framed photo of her old team, her team, not his, and walked toward the door. "Are you just giving up?" Nathan's voice trailed behind her, incredulous. Madeline turned back, her face devoid of emotion, her eyes cold and calculating. "You already won, right?" she said, her tone almost mocking. Without waiting for his response, she turned on her heel and walked out of the office, leaving Nathan behind, watching her with an unreadable expression. She stepped into the cool Seattle air, the city alive with the hum of traffic and the distant sounds of people starting their day. The air was thick with fog, the familiar scent of coffee mixing with the chill. She slipped her jacket on, pulling it tight around her as her phone buzzed in her pocket. A quick glance at the screen revealed a message from Claire, her lead developer and closest ally. Text from Claire, "Is it done?" Madeline didn't hesitate to respond. Text from Madeline, "It's done. Start prepping Plan Echo." She paused for a moment, allowing the weight of the decision to sink in. This wasn't over. It had barely begun. Text from Claire, "Meet at the Haven?" Text from Madeline, "1 hour. Bring everyone." As she typed the message, the plan she had been meticulously crafting for the past 6 months began to take shape. Plan Echo was set in motion. She had known Nathan's betrayal was coming, and now it was time to put her backup plan into action. He thought he had won, but she had prepared for this moment. Madeline passed Bryn Morales, the head of HR, in the lobby. Bryn avoided her gaze, clearly unable to meet her eyes. She had been one of the first to sign the board resolution, the one that had condemned Madeline to this fate. But Madeline wasn't angry. She had expected this. It was nothing personal. It was just business. Funny how betrayal always wears the same perfume, she thought, her lips curling into a faint smile. She stepped outside into the misty morning, the city waking up around her. The weight of the termination papers in her bag felt strangely light. The true battle wasn't about the company. It was about power, control, and who understood the code. And Nathan? He never understood the code. She climbed into her car, the engine purring to life as she drove toward her off-grid home in Bainbridge Island. The drive was long, but the silence was comforting. As she cruised through the quiet streets, her thoughts drifted back to the beginning. The early days of Signal Corps, the late nights spent coding, the excitement of building something from nothing. Flashback. When Nathan and she first met at Stanford's computer science program, he had seemed like the perfect match. Smart, driven, and passionate about coding. They had married right after graduation, and everything had seemed perfect. But as the years passed, things changed. While Madeline poured herself into building the company, Nathan climbed the corporate ladder using charm and connections to further his own ambitions. He didn't just steal my company. He stole my vision, my trust, and now he's taken everything, she thought, a pang of regret flickering briefly. But it didn't last. She had long since let go of that part of herself. Now she was something new. She pulled into her driveway, hidden from the prying eyes of the world. Her house was small, nothing compared to the one she had shared with Nathan, but it was hers. She had built this life, this refuge, with her own hands. It was secure, isolated, and perfect for what came next. She parked the car and stepped inside, heading straight for her hidden office. The air smelled of fresh ink and old books, the perfect environment for the final phase of her plan. Madeline powered up her computer and connected to the encrypted development server. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her heart steady. The countdown had already begun. Screen text: Initiate, Echo Protocol 709. Status: Access granted. Final phase armed. The trap was set. 7 months earlier, Madeline Carter had been oblivious. The late-night logins to the development servers, she brushed them off at first, chalking them up to routine system checks or maybe a glitch in the software. But over the past few weeks, the anomalies became harder to ignore. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she opened the server logs again, her eyes scanning for patterns. There it was, a series of access attempts, each one coming from a new IP address, each one more persistent than the last. A ping from a server in Berlin, a nudge in the system that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't just anyone accessing the database. This was intentional. Her heart skipped a beat as she reread the entry. The times were always late at night, when she would be home alone, unwinding after hours of coding. But that wasn't the only thing that bothered her. It was the timing. The last few days had been chaotic, with endless meetings, presentations, and sales pitches. Nathan had kept her busy, distracted, so she wouldn't notice the gradual shift. This wasn't just any hack. This was targeted. Madeline's fingers froze over the keyboard as the realization hit her. Nathan. Nathan was trying to access the heart of Signal Corps, the development servers that she had built from the ground up, the ones he had no access to, until now. She leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. There were only a handful of people who could even attempt to breach the system with such precision. Nathan Blake, her ex-husband, had joined Signal Corps as COO only 2 years ago. And now, it seemed like he was using his position to dismantle everything she had created. But this was only the beginning. Madeline had been preparing for this. She had known that Nathan would pull something like this eventually. The divorce had been a smokescreen, a clever maneuver. Everything he had done, every move he made, had been to get closer to the company. Now, he had finally made his move. She had to act fast. Madeline sat up straight. Her eyes narrowed as she focused on the screen in front of her. She wasn't about to let Nathan destroy everything she had worked for. If he thought he could just waltz in and take over, he was in for a rude awakening. Claire had been the first person Madeline trusted with her plan. Claire had been with her from the very beginning, and she knew the ins and outs of Signal Corps' infrastructure better than anyone. Together, they had built the Echo Protocol. It was their insurance policy, a fail-safe in case things went south. Now, with Nathan's breach, it was time to activate it. Madeline's fingers flew across the keyboard, quickly initiating the server lock protocol. But there was more to do. She couldn't just shut him out. She had to make sure that Nathan wouldn't see it coming. That's when she decided to plant something deeper, a backdoor hidden in the code that would only activate once Nathan was fully in charge. The neuropulse module that Nathan had been so eager to roll out? It wasn't just a new defense system. It was a trap, and he would be the one to trigger it. Tyrese Cole, the young ethical hacker who had joined Signal Corps only a year ago, had become one of her most trusted allies. Madeline had reached out to him late one night, asking him to help her set up the kill switch in the code. He had been skeptical at first, but once he saw the way Nathan was manipulating things, he had agreed without hesitation. "You're not just locking him out of the system, are you?" Tyrese asked, his voice crackling through the encrypted chat line. "No," Madeline replied. "I'm giving him exactly what he wants. He's going to think he's in control. He's going to think that Neuropulse is a breakthrough. But once the product is launched under his name, everything he's built will collapse. It'll fall apart from the inside. All he'll have left is the rubble." Tyrese laughed nervously. "This is insane, Maddie. You're a genius." "I'm not a genius," Madeline said, her voice flat. "I'm just trying to make sure that he doesn't get away with this." They worked late into the night, adding subtle back doors, hidden in plain sight, disguised as routine updates to the code. The code would appear completely normal to anyone monitoring it, but once Nathan signed off on it, everything would change. Neuropulse would malfunction, and the system would begin to self-destruct. The next morning, the entire team gathered in a small, nondescript cafe on the outskirts of Seattle. It was the perfect place for secret meetings, away from the watchful eyes of Nathan and the board members who had already chosen sides. Madeline had gathered her loyalists, the engineers, the developers, the people who had stood by her through thick and thin. Alex Grant, the head of infrastructure, was the first to arrive. His skepticism had been evident when she first asked him to join this covert mission, but he had come around after seeing the cracks in Nathan's leadership. "You sure about this, Madeline?" Alex asked as he sat down, looking around cautiously. "I've never been more sure," she replied. "Nathan's about to pull the trigger, but when he does, he won't know what hit him." Claire arrived next, a smile on her face despite the tension in the air. She had been the one to help Madeline organize the Phase 1 plan, making sure they had all the pieces in place. Maya Lin, the UX/UI architect, followed shortly after, her eyes filled with determination. She had been with Madeline through some of the company's most challenging moments. She was in this for the long haul. "Is everything set?" Maya asked as she sat down. "Almost," Madeline replied. "We need to make sure that everything is in place. Once he signs off on Neuropulse, it's game over." Tyrese sat next to Claire, his fingers tapping anxiously on the table. "We just need to make sure the timing's right," he said. "We can't mess this up." Madeline nodded. The timing was everything. Nathan thought he had won. He thought he had control of Signal Corps, but in reality, he was walking right into a trap. The group quickly ran through the final details of the plan. The stakes were high, but Madeline didn't flinch. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. As the meeting ended, Madeline stood up, her face resolute. "We've done our part. Now let him do his." She stepped outside the cafe, her heart racing. The countdown had begun. She had done everything she could. Now it was Nathan's turn to play his hand. And when he did, he would regret it. Nathan Blake stood in front of the sleek, polished podium in the heart of downtown Seattle. His sharp, tailored suit reflected the city's early morning sun as he adjusted the microphone, his eyes scanning the crowd of investors, journalists, and tech industry leaders who had gathered for Signal Corps' launch event. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the hum of eager anticipation. This was Nathan's moment. He had successfully maneuvered himself into the CEO position of a company that had once belonged to his ex-wife. And today, he would present the world with their most ambitious product yet, Neuropulse. Madeline Carter's face flashed in his mind for a split second, but he quickly shoved the thought aside. He was in control now. This was his company, and this was his time to shine. His fingers brushed against the polished wood of the podium, and he glanced down at his notes, ready to begin. He could feel the heat of the spotlight on him, but it didn't faze him. He thrived in these moments, always had. The lights, the attention, it was all part of the game. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathan began, his voice smooth and confident, "Signal Corps is proud to present Neuropulse, the next generation of autonomous defense systems. This groundbreaking AI technology will revolutionize cybersecurity as we know it." The crowd erupted into applause, and Nathan basked in it, a smug smile playing at the corners of his lips. He was used to this. He was a master of the public spectacle, able to manipulate every word, every gesture to suit his needs. But what he didn't know was that everything he was about to say, everything he had worked for, was a smokescreen. His victory was already slipping through his fingers, and he had no idea. Back in Madeline's hidden office, a few miles away, her team was watching the event unfold on a live stream. The room was tense, silent, the only sound the faint hum of the server racks in the background. Madeline stood in front of the screen, her eyes glued to Nathan as he continued with his presentation. "Right now, Nathan believes he's untouchable," Madeline murmured, her voice low but steady. "He thinks Neuropulse is his crown jewel, but he's about to learn the hard way that he never understood the system he's dealing with." Alex Grant, the head of infrastructure, stood by the server rack, his arms crossed. He had been skeptical about Madeline's plan at first, but after everything that had happened, he was fully on board. He knew the stakes. The future of Signal Corps depended on the success of this plan. Tyrese Cole, the junior developer who had helped Madeline set up the backdoor triggers, sat at his desk, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he monitored the real-time data coming from the server. "I'm tracking the launch," he said, his voice tight with focus. "Neuropulse is live. We're a few minutes away from Phase 1. Maya Lin, the UX/UI architect, leaned over Tyrese's shoulder, her brow furrowed with concentration. "We can't afford any mistakes. If this goes south, Nathan will turn it into a PR disaster." Madeline nodded. "We've planned for every contingency. We know exactly what we're doing." The countdown on the screen ticked down, the seconds moving like hours. The anticipation in the room was palpable. For a moment, all they could hear was the sound of their own breathing. Then, Tyrese's voice broke the silence. "It's happening," he said, his voice calm but filled with an edge of excitement. "Neuropulse is in the system. Triggering Phase 1 now!" Madeline's eyes flashed with determination. She knew that once Nathan signed off on Neuropulse, he was walking straight into their trap. The software was already beginning to malfunction in ways he wouldn't understand. The moment he made it public, it would explode. His legacy, his control over Signal Corps, everything he thought he had would crumble. Back at the launch event, Nathan smiled as the crowd erupted into applause. But behind his smile, there was a growing unease. He could feel something shifting, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The demo had gone perfectly, but now that they were transitioning to the live application, something felt off. "Everything's fine," Nathan muttered to himself as he adjusted his tie, trying to shake the feeling of discomfort that was creeping up on him. He needed to stay focused. The crowd needed to believe in the product. He couldn't afford any doubts now. As he turned back to the screen to initiate the live demo, a notification flashed on his tablet. "Error. System integrity breach." His eyes narrowed. This was impossible. The system had been tested and retested. He had signed off on it just hours earlier. He glanced at his team, panic beginning to take root. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice tight with concern. A technician quickly approached him, a worried look on their face. "There's an issue with the code, sir. It's—" The technician froze, eyes wide with shock. "Fix it!" Nathan snapped, his frustration mounting. "We can't afford to lose this." But it was already too late. Back in Madeline's office, her team watched in real time as the first signs of failure began to manifest. Neuropulse was self-destructing, slowly at first, small errors, glitches in the system. But as the minutes passed, the errors grew larger, more significant. The AI was replicating itself, spreading through the network, sabotaging every connected device it could reach. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't even a hack. It was a controlled explosion. triggered by a series of backdoors that Madeline had planted. The stock market responded almost immediately. Signal Corp's share prices began to plummet as the news spread like wildfire. The first wave of investors began pulling their money out. "Phase 1 complete," Tyrese said with a grin, looking up at Madeline. "Now we just need to watch the fireworks." At the launch event, the atmosphere had shifted from excitement to panic. Nathan's face was pale, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The technicians scrambled to try and regain control, but the damage was done. The system had already begun to fail spectacularly. Media outlets were buzzing, with headlines like, "Signal Corp faces major security breach, investors panic," and NeuroPulse launch results in catastrophic failures. What went wrong? As the news spread, the real-world effects of the breach became apparent. Clients who had been early adopters of the product began terminating contracts, and major corporations began pulling their investments. Nathan's nightmare was unfolding before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Madeline watched it all unfold from her hidden office, the faintest smile playing at the corners of her lips. This was it. Nathan had played right into her hands. He thought he had won, but he had no idea what was waiting for him. He had underestimated her, just like everyone else who had ever tried to steal her company. And now it was time for him to face the consequences. The stark fluorescent lights of Signal Corp's headquarters seemed to hum louder in the empty conference room, their unrelenting brightness casting long shadows across the sleek, modern furniture. Madeline Carter stood in front of the glass doors, her hand hovering over the handle. She had been here countless times before, but this time felt different. This time, she wasn't walking into the room as the leader of Signal Corp, but as a former CEO, fired without warning by the man who once stood by her side. Nathan Blake had made his move, and now it was her turn. She was here to take back what was hers. She stepped into the room, the sound of her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The air felt thick, tense. Inside, a dozen or so board members were already seated around the long rectangular table. Most of them avoided looking directly at her, but she knew they were all thinking the same thing. How did we let this happen? Nathan was standing at the head of the table, a slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. He didn't look as confident as he had the day before, when he had announced the launch of NeuroPulse to the world. The smug, self-assured Nathan that had fired her just a few hours ago was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a man on the edge, looking like he was trying to hold everything together while the walls were closing in around him. "Nathan," Madeline said calmly, her voice steady, betraying no emotion. "We need to talk." Nathan's head snapped up at the sound of her voice, and for a moment their eyes locked. She could see the flash of recognition, followed by something darker. Fear. Fear of what was to come. He hadn't prepared for this. He thought he could break her, but he was wrong. "Madeline," Nathan said, his voice tight, trying to mask his anxiety. "What are you doing here? This is a board meeting." "It is," Madeline replied smoothly, walking toward the table. She took her seat at the far end, her eyes scanning the faces of the board members. They all looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, unwilling to meet her gaze. "I think we both know why I'm here," she continued, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "You've staged a hostile takeover, Nathan. You've taken control of Signal Corp." He shifted uncomfortably, but his voice remained firm. "I'm doing what's best for the company, Madeline. You've lost touch with reality. This place needs a different kind of leadership." "A different kind of leadership?" Madeline repeated, a small laugh escaping her lips. "No, Nathan. What this company needs is someone who understands it. Someone who knows the code, who built this company from the ground up. Someone who didn't use it as a stepping stone for their own personal gain." Nathan's face hardened. "Enough with the theatrics, Madeline. What do you want?" Madeline leaned back in her chair, the weight of the moment settling over her. The tension in the room was palpable, and she knew she had everyone's attention now. The board members were watching her closely, unsure of how this was going to play out. She had prepared for this. She had made sure she was ready for every eventuality. But she knew one thing for certain. Nathan had made a grave mistake. He had underestimated her. "I want you to step down, Nathan," she said, her voice low but unyielding. I want you to resign. Walk away from Signal Corps, and I'll let you keep some semblance of your reputation. Leave now, and we can avoid a mess." Nathan's jaw clenched. "You think I'm just going to walk away? You think the board will back you after everything you've done?" Madeline smiled, her eyes never leaving his. "The board will do whatever I say. They'll have to. They'll be forced to choose between you and me." He laughed bitterly, his eyes flashing with anger. "You've lost it, Madeline. You think you can just waltz back in here and take everything? You're not the leader anymore. I am." Madeline remained silent for a moment, allowing his words to hang in the air. She could see the cracks in his facade, the way he was trying so desperately to hold on to the control he thought he had, but it was slipping away from him. Slowly, methodically, it was slipping. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't reach for it. She already knew what was happening. The stock price was plummeting again. The triggers had been set, and now Nathan's empire was starting to crumble. "What do you think is going to happen, Nathan?" Madeline asked softly, her gaze never wavering. "You've already lost. The product's a disaster. The investors are pulling out. Your public announcement, it's all falling apart." Nathan's face twisted with disbelief. "You did this, didn't you?" Madeline raised an eyebrow. "I didn't do anything. You did it all yourself. You thought you could control everything. You thought you could manipulate your way to the top. But you didn't understand one thing." Nathan leaned forward, his fists clenched. "What's that?" "That real power isn't in the boardroom or the press conferences," she said, her voice growing colder. "It's in the code, and I've always controlled that." Nathan's face drained of color as the reality of what was happening set in. His phone buzzed on the table, and he grabbed it quickly, his hands shaking. The screen showed the stock price, a staggering drop of over 30% in just minutes. "God," he muttered under his breath, staring at the screen. "What the hell did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Madeline said, her voice calm. "You set the system in motion. I just accelerated it." "Damn it," Nathan spat, slamming the phone down onto the table. "This isn't over. You're not getting away with this." Madeline leaned forward, her eyes cold. "I already have. The board's already made its decision." She turned to the other members of the board, who had been silent up until now, watching the exchange between the two former spouses with growing unease. "You've already made your choice," she said. "Nathan Blake is no longer the CEO of Signal Corps." The room fell silent as the board members looked at each other, uncertainty and fear etched on their faces. Then slowly, one by one, they began to nod, acknowledging what had already been set in motion. Nathan's grip on the company was slipping, and there was no way to stop it. "You're done, Nathan," Madeline said, her voice final. "You lost, and you'll never take it back." Nathan stood there, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by a soft voice from across the room. "Madeline's right," said Claire and Gwen, the lead developer who had been standing quietly in the back of the room. "It's over." Nathan turned, his eyes burning with rage. "You? You're part of this too?" Claire didn't flinch. "We've been building Aurora Shield for the past 6 months. We knew this day would come, and now Signal Corps belongs to Madeline." Nathan turned and stormed out of the room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the room in silence. Madeline didn't say a word as she stood up, the weight of the moment finally settling in. The battle was over. Signal Corps was hers again. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of Signal Corps' newly renovated headquarters, casting long shadows across the room. It was a place of quiet power now, no longer the cold, sterile shell it had been when Nathan was in control. The energy in the building had shifted, and Madeline Carter felt it in her bones as she walked down the hallway. Every step she took was a step closer to reclaiming what was hers. The boardroom, once the site of her most painful defeat, was now her domain once more. It had been a long road to get here, but she was finally back in charge. As she entered the boardroom, the familiar faces of the Signal Corps executives were there waiting for her. The loyalists, those who had stood by her through thick and thin, who had believed in her vision when no one else did. Her heart swelled with pride as she saw them sitting around the table, ready to move forward. Alex Grant, the head of infrastructure, looked up from his tablet as she entered. His eyes met hers, and a small, approving smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Alex had been with Madeline since the early days, and he had never wavered in his loyalty to her. Maya Lin, the UX/UI architect, stood to greet her, a look of quiet determination on her face. Maya had always been more than just an architect. She was a friend, a confidant, someone who truly understood the stakes. And then there was Tyrese Cole, the young developer who had helped set the trap for Nathan. His eyes were filled with excitement, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the table as he waited for Madeline to speak. Madeline took her seat at the head of the table, her gaze sweeping across the room. The familiar faces, the weight of everything she had been through, and yet she felt no fear, no doubt. "This is our moment," Madeline said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "We've come through the fire, and now Signal Corps is going to be stronger than ever." Madeline's fingers tapped the surface of the table, the sound sharp in the stillness of the room. She looked down at the tablet in front of her, her eyes scanning the reports that had just come in. The numbers were incredible. Signal Corps' stock was rising, steadily climbing back to where it had been before Nathan's disastrous launch of Neuropulse. But this time, it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the foundation that Madeline had built, a foundation that would not crumble under pressure. "We're ahead of schedule," Madeline said, glancing up at her team. "Aurora Shield is ready for its next phase. We've made adjustments to the system, and now it's time to release it to our clients." Claire Nguyen, her lead developer, sat back in her chair, her expression one of pride and determination. "We've optimized the code, and the security layers are unbreakable now. The system is airtight. No one can get through it, not even Nathan." Madeline nodded. "Good. Let's make sure the world knows that Signal Corps is back, and we're stronger than ever." But as Madeline sat back in her chair, reflecting on the victory, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen lit up with the name of Bridget Reyes, the investigative tech journalist who had played a pivotal role in exposing Nathan's corruption during the company's collapse. Madeline picked up the call, her voice calm as always. "Bridget, what's the news?" Bridget's voice came through the phone, sharp and direct. "The investors are getting restless. They want reassurance. They want answers. They're waiting for your next move." Madeline's lips curled into a small smile. "I've got that covered. Just make sure the press knows the truth. We're not just rebuilding Signal Corps, we're transforming it." The meeting continued as Madeline laid out her plan for the future. The launch of Aurora Shield was only the beginning. The next step was to reclaim the trust of their investors, their clients, and the public. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Nathan's shadow still loomed over Signal Corps, and the damage he had caused wouldn't disappear overnight. But Madeline was no stranger to hard work, and she wasn't about to let anyone take what was hers. She glanced at Claire, who was still watching her closely. There was an unspoken bond between them, something deeper than just professional respect. They had built this company together, and now they would rebuild it again. "Claire," Madeline said, her tone serious, "let's start planning our next press release. We'll rebrand Signal Corps completely. It's time to leave the past behind." Claire nodded. "I'll get started on the strategy. We'll need a new campaign that highlights everything we've accomplished and everything that's coming." As the meeting wrapped up, Madeline stood and walked over to the large windows that overlooked the city. The view was breathtaking. The skyline of Seattle stretched out before her, the sun casting long shadows over the glass buildings below. This city, this company, Signal Corps, was hers again. She had fought for it. She had won. And now she would build it into something even greater than before. Challenge. Later that afternoon, Madeline received an email notification from the legal team. It was the final paperwork. The deal was done. Signal Corps was officially back in her control. She read through the document, her eyes scanning the fine print. Everything was in order. The board had officially reinstated her as CEO, and the transition was seamless. It felt like a victory, but Madeline knew better than to get too comfortable. Nathan would never stop trying to reclaim the company, but that was fine. He could try all he wanted. She would always be one step ahead. The next morning, the headlines were already rolling in. Madeline Carter reclaims control of Signal Corps, the return of the tech genius. Former CEO Nathan Blake's takeover attempt ends in disaster. Aurora Shield, the future of cybersecurity, built by Madeline Carter. Madeline took a deep breath as she looked at the articles flooding her inbox. The world was finally seeing what she had always known. She was the heart of Signal Corps. And now, with Aurora Shield ready to launch, the company was going to be unstoppable. Madeline walked through the newly renovated Signal Corps campus that afternoon, her footsteps echoing in the spacious hallways. She passed a framed photo of her old team, Nathan included, who had been there from the beginning. As she walked past, she didn't stop to look at it. She had no time for the past anymore. She had no time for betrayal. What mattered now was the future of Signal Corps, the future of Aurora Shield, the future of Madeline Carter. As she stepped out into the sunshine, the world seemed to open up before her, endless and full of possibilities. This was just the beginning. She had won, and now nothing would stand in her way. Final line. He thought he could take what I built, but I never gave it to him, not even for a second.